The rise of Jimmy Hoffa, power, labor, and the mob. In the smoky din of Depression-era labor yards, a young man watched, listened, and learned. His name was James Riddle Hoffa, a stocky teenager with sharp instincts and a voice that could command a crowd or cut through a picket line. Born in 1913 in Brazil, Indiana, Hoffa's father died when he was just 7. Poverty wasn't a stranger, it was a roommate. But Hoffa didn't shrink from hardship, he wrestled it into submission. By his early 20s, Hoffa was working as a grocery warehouseman in Detroit, where the conditions were grueling and the pay insulting. But Hoffa had something most workers lacked: the fire to organize. He helped lead a strike that succeeded not through violence but through timing and leverage. Word spread. This kid didn't just speak for the working man, he fought for him. The Teamsters Union, then a scattered force of truckers and warehouse workers, noticed. Hoffa joined in the 1930s and climbed through the ranks with an iron will and a handshake that promised loyalty. By the 1950s, he was the union's undisputed powerhouse, boasting over 2 million members. Truck drivers, freight haulers, warehouse operators. Their loyalty wasn't just professional, it was personal. Hoffa stood for them. And they stood for him. But with great power came dangerous company. To expand the Teamsters, Hoffa made deals, not all of them clean. He aligned with men whose faces never appeared in newspapers, whose hands were never caught holding the gun. The Mafia, nameless figures from Chicago, Detroit, New Jersey, wanted access to the Teamsters' multi-million-dollar pension fund. In return, they offered protection, favors, and silence. Hoffa didn't flinch. In his eyes, this was business. And business meant results. But not everyone shared that view. In Washington, a storm was brewing. Robert F. Kennedy, then chief counsel for the Senate's Labor Racketeering Committee, made Hoffa his personal mission. To Kennedy, Hoffa wasn't just a corrupt labor boss, he was a threat to American justice. Their battles were fierce, televised, and deeply personal. Hoffa relished the fight. Kennedy sharpened his aim. Eventually, the law caught up. In 1967, Hoffa was convicted of jury tampering, fraud, and attempted bribery, sentenced to 13 years in prison. His fall was as dramatic as his rise. But even behind bars, Hoffa plotted. He studied the chessboard, waiting for the right moment to move. He would not go quietly. When President Nixon commuted his sentence in 1971, Hoffa emerged with a singular goal: retake control of the Teamsters. But he was older now. The world had changed. Old allies had shifted. The men he once bargained with had grown silent, and more dangerous. Jimmy Hoffa believed he could reclaim his throne. What he didn't know was that his final move had already been set in motion. The day he vanished, July 30th, 1975. The morning of July 30th, 1975, broke like any other in suburban Detroit. The air was thick with summer heat, the kind that clings to your skin and slows down time. But Jimmy Hoffa was restless. Dressed in a crisp blue shirt and dark slacks, he left his modest lakeside home in Bloomfield Township with the precision of a man who still believed he was important. He was headed to a meeting, a supposed reconciliation with two powerful mob figures, Anthony, Tony Provenzano, a volatile union official with a violent streak, and Anthony, Tony Jack Aloni, a well-connected Detroit mobster. Hoffa had told his wife, his friends, and even his barber about the meeting. He believed it would mark his return to power. It would instead become the last confirmed chapter of his life. At 2 p.m., Hoffa arrived at the Machu's Red Fox, a restaurant in the quiet suburb of Bloomfield Hills. He waited in the parking lot, pacing, checking his watch. According to witnesses, he appeared agitated, glancing at each passing car, scanning for familiar faces. But the Tonys never arrived. Or if they did, they made sure no one saw them. By 2:45 p.m., Hoffa was gone. Vanished. His car, a green Pontiac, was found the next day in the restaurant's parking lot, unlocked, undisturbed. There were no signs of struggle. No shattered glass. No blood. The press erupted. Headlines screamed with theories: kidnapping, mob execution, government plot. But there were no eyewitnesses, no credible sightings, no ransom demands. Just a void. Even Hoffa's closest allies were baffled. He wouldn't have gone quietly, one said. He'd have fought like hell. But there were no marks, no sounds, no witnesses. Just that eerie, unsettling silence. Authorities began suspecting a setup. That someone Hoffa trusted had lured him to that location. That the meeting was a trap. A final betrayal wrapped in false promises. Over the next week, the FBI launched what would become one of the largest missing persons investigations in American history. They searched fields, lakes, warehouses, anything within a 100-mile radius. They found nothing. No body. No weapon. No confession. Jimmy Hoffa had simply disappeared. And with him, so did any clear answers, theories, confessions, and hoaxes. In the days after Jimmy Hoffa vanished, the nation was gripped, not just by the shock, but by the vacuum. Power players closed their mouths. Suspects lawyered up. And the silence, thick and calculated, gave birth to what would become a tapestry of theories, some credible, others absurd, and a few that still haunt the edges of truth. The first, and most enduring, was simple: the mob did it. Investigators believed Hoffa's ambition, his refusal to stay quiet and retire, had made him a threat. He wanted his throne back. But the men who now controlled the Teamsters didn't want him stirring the pot. To them, Hoffa wasn't just a nuisance, he was a liability. A man who knew too much. A man who wouldn't let go. Whispers emerged. He was strangled in the back seat of a car by someone he trusted. Perhaps Chucky O'Brien, a longtime Hoffa associate, who allegedly picked him up that day. O'Brien denied it, but a car he borrowed, connected to a known mobster, had traces of Hoffa's hair. Not blood. Just hair. It wasn't enough. Then came the Giant Stadium legend, that Hoffa was buried beneath the New Jersey football field during its construction. It spread like wildfire. Jokes followed. Late-night shows ran with it. But there was never any real evidence, just a catchy headline. Others claimed Hoffa's body had been ground up in a Detroit meat processing plant, burned in a crematorium controlled by mobsters, or dumped in a Great Lakes landfill. The FBI chased every lead. They dug up farms, drained lakes, and even searched beneath suburban driveways. Every time, they came up empty. In 2001, the Bureau got a hit. A DNA test confirmed that a strand of hair found in that borrowed car did belong to Hoffa. But without a body, a weapon, or a confession, it meant little. Then came the deathbed confessions. Dozens of them. In 2004, a man named Frank Sheeran, a mob enforcer and former Hoffa ally, claimed in his memoir, "I heard you paint houses," that he had shot Hoffa in a house in Detroit and watched others dispose of the body. His story became the basis for Martin Scorsese's The Irishman. But FBI files suggest Sheeran's timeline didn't match. Still, it was compelling enough to stir new interest. Theories continued: the CIA did it. Cuban operatives did it. Rogue union officials. Maybe even the FBI itself. But in all these stories, one thread held firm: no one talked. No one broke code. Decades passed, and still, not a single solid piece of evidence emerged to answer the central question: what really happened between 2 o'clock and 2:45 p.m. that day? By 1982, Jimmy Hoffa was declared legally dead. But in the public mind, he was more alive than ever, immortalized not as a man, but as a mystery. A ghost with no grave. Legacy, impact, and the mystery that refuses to die. Years have passed. Decades even. But the name Jimmy Hoffa still hangs in the air like an unfinished sentence, heavy, unresolved, and unforgettable. By the time he was declared legally dead in 1982, Hoffa had already transcended mortality. He was no longer just the tough-as-nails union boss. He had become something more enduring, more unsettling, a symbol. A man swallowed by the very power he once controlled. Today, Hoffa's legacy is torn between admiration and suspicion. To millions of working-class Americans, he remains a hero, a voice that fought for fair wages, pensions, and dignity in labor. Under his leadership, the Teamsters became a force of national power, feared and respected. But behind the achievements was a darker undercurrent, a trail of corruption, bribes, and alliances with men who carried silencers instead of contracts. The Teamsters Union, in the years following his disappearance, struggled to clean house. Leadership changed. Laws tightened. The Mafia influence faded, at least publicly. But the ghost of Hoffa lingered, watching from the shadows of old headlines and dusty courtrooms. Hollywood, of course, couldn't resist. His story became the subject of books, documentaries, even major films like Hoffa, 1992, and The Irishman, 2019. Each portrayal added another layer of myth, another angle on a man who defied easy categorization. Was he a patriot of the working class, or a pawn in the mob's empire? Even the FBI hasn't given up. As recently as the 2020s, new leads prompted fresh digs, media briefings, and anonymous tips. Every generation seems to believe they'll be the one to finally unearth Hoffa, to answer the question that has haunted America since that summer afternoon in 1975. But maybe that's the point. Jimmy Hoffa's story endures because it has no ending. It exists in the in-between, a perfect storm of truth, power, and myth. A man who rose too high, made too many enemies, and vanished too cleanly to make sense. In a way, Hoffa became America's own urban legend. Just credible enough to believe. Just mysterious enough to doubt. His name still evokes a certain reaction, eyebrows raised, whispers exchanged, theories repeated like gospel. And perhaps, somewhere, someone still knows the truth. A secret passed down like a family heirloom. A silent pact never broken. But as time stretches forward, the truth recedes further into fog. Witnesses die. Memories fade. Files are locked away, redacted, buried under bureaucracy and fear. Still, we ask the same question, what happened to Jimmy Hoffa? Maybe we'll never know. Maybe that's what makes his story timeless. Not just a disappearance, but a mirror held up to power, ambition, and silence. And in that silence, the legend of Jimmy Hoffa lives on.
Please subscribe my channel so you can get everyday new real stories.